conversation with you if we need to be. There was several handouts that were back there on the table as well. Those are really just meant to be tools for you. We're going to go over a lot of the details covered in those, but we wanted you to have something to take back with you and have as reference material. So we're excited that all of these projects are here. I'm grateful that we have Supervisor Bishop here even to be part of the kickoff meeting. We think these are important projects in District 4. And rather than have one kickoff meeting with each one of the projects being represented here, we thought it would be good to bring everyone together and kind of give you an overview of what our role in the county will be and what we need from you to make sure that you can be successful in these projects and successful in submitting for reimbursements. So before I really dive into it, I am going to ask everyone that's here, I keep wanting to look over there, I'm going to talk to the audience here. Everyone that's in the audience, if you could just introduce yourself and what your project represents. So it'll help with, we've got a couple people from county staff that are going to be the primary points of contact. So for them to be able to put a face with a name will be really helpful. So I'm Tara Acton, I'm the procurement director for Mojave County, and you're gonna get bored hearing from me over the next probably 20 or 30 minutes. And then we'll start with Supervisor Bishop, and I'll just go around the table, so, or around the auditorium.
Good afternoon, my name is Kathy Clark. I'm from Florida Domestic Water Improvement District, and we're going to be doing water and infrastructure. So
that's perfect. You'll just do it all together? Okay. Go ahead. You're with them? Got it.
I'm Coral Lloyd. I'm the county's finance director or chief financial officer. So I'll also be presenting alongside Tara today. A lot of the information that I'll be discussing will be ultimately covered. You'll be coordinating with Don Wilson and I don't remember which project, but also Joanne over here. So they'll introduce themselves. But I am soon leaving the county. I'm retiring at the end of the next week, so.
This is Coral's last hurrah.
Yeah, my time here is short, but I'll continue to try to help out and do what I can. Thank you for being here.
I work from the Coral Finance Department. I'm here to back up in case somebody needs something.
She does all of that's not it.
I know.
No, Judy does all of the financial reporting for ARPA and all emergency events that occur for the county through the federal government's portals. She gathers information. There's a lot that goes on behind it. Judy is the county's person that does the emergency services reporting.
Go ahead, Don.
All of the projects except for 4, I'm already a little different contact financial and research.
It's you, Tim. Go ahead.
President of the Board of Directors for G32 in Waco, Arizona, and sort of my own association. We run a water company for the people that live there.
Thank you.
I'm Leroy Edelman. I'm a resident of White Hills and also the caretaker for G32 development. I handle all the operations. And I'm Steve Costin.
Thank you, Ryan. And then we do have a couple people that were not able to make it here. As you all know, we've had some wonderful weather. So a few people are dealing with, I guess, the results of that weather. And so they are virtually on the screen. And I guess I can call on you if you'd introduce yourself and which project you're representing. It looks like right now we only have Jeremy. I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name, but if you'd like to introduce yourself. I don't know if it's going to work. Oh. No, it looks like we lost him. And then we have the county managers also on this call on the line. I don't know if he'll be able to introduce himself either, so.
I can.
Yay, thank you, Sam.
Good afternoon, this is Sam Altos, I'm the county manager. I'm grateful that you all made time for this meeting. We value your presence and look forward to working with you to advance these projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So with that, I'm going to move forward, kind of a quick overview of the projects that have been approved by the board and where they're at in the process. And then we will go through sort of the procurement requirements, what you have to do in order to secure services for your projects. And then I'll turn the mic over to Coral to talk about the financial elements and the reporting for that. And then we should be able to open it up for questions, any introductions of staff, and anything else that, that you all need. So I'm going to move forward with the presentation. So please, yes. I don't know. I was hoping that he would be able to introduce himself. I know we had a couple of different groups that needed to attend virtually. MeView was one of them, and I think Joshua Tree. So I'm not sure which one he was representing, but we'll follow up on the emails and anything for, I mean, right now, the county manager is the only virtual attendee, but we will email this all out to any of the virtual attendees as well. And if any of you would like us to email documents, we can do that as well. We just wanted to give you kind of something physical if that would help. So a quick overview of the projects. We do have the Joshua Tree Water LLC storage tank replacement project. The board approved up to $54,082 on March 7th. And the funding agreement is pending chairman's signature. I believe it's actually scheduled to go before the board on Monday. Once that funding agreement is authorized, then you guys will be in a position to move forward with your projects. So all of this will be really relevant to you Monday morning. We have the GHR Unit 2 Landowners Association. We've been calling this the White Hills Area Project. And then when I got to looking at the backup, realized that it was the GHR Unit 2 Landowners Association Water Cooperative, and that was a project for a new well, approved up to $64,691 on March 7th, and the funding agreement for that one is still needed, so I'm grateful that GHR is here, and please get in touch with the County Attorney Ryan Esplin so that we can make sure that we finalize your agreement and get it through the approval process so that you can actually start working on your project. We have the Chloride Domestic Water Improvement District infrastructure projects. Up to $1 million was allocated for that and approved on July 5th. The funding agreement was executed on August 15th. So this is great timely information for you. You guys are able to start moving forward with your projects as soon as we get the documentation we need from you that we'll be covering. The other projects, we have Mount Tipton Water Companies, which includes well, casing, and standpipe work. That's up to $535,000 and, wow, $535,015. It was approved also on July 5th, and the funding agreement has been executed for that one. So next steps are getting this documentation to us and going through your procurement processes to get your projects moving. The Joshua Valley Utility Company has a project related to generators and switch installation. That's up to $165,014, again, approved on July 5th, and we still need a funding agreement for that. So I don't see Jeremy on the call again. I think he dropped off, but at least if that is Jeremy, then we'll be in touch with you to get the funding agreement together. The next project, we also still need a funding agreement. So if Jeremy's representing Lake Mead Community Co-op, that is a commercial well, water storage tank, and well pump and pipe replacement. And that's up to $575,000. Again, the project itself in concept was approved on July 5th, but we do need a funding agreement before anything can move forward on that. I guess for anyone in the room, does this match with what you believe where the status of your project is? I think we've got the most up-to-date information, but if you feel like something's off or you were working on something and we didn't capture it here, we would need to know that. Or like I said, please get in touch with Ryan so that he can work with you to get the agreement in place. I'm not seeing any hands. I see some thumbs up. That's encouraging. Thank you. So now we're going to get into the fun part of the presentation. Hopefully I can go through this fairly quickly for you all. I think I've made it pretty clear. Funding agreements are required prior to you doing any work. Those funding agreements spell out the terms of the requirements that the county has and the requirements that you must meet as a subrecipient of these federal funds. I would caution you on anything that we have these funding agreements, treat it like it's a sub-grant, like you are getting a federal grant through Mojave County, and there are going to be restrictions and things that you must comply with in order for us to reimburse you. That is not because the county is trying to be difficult. That is not because we're trying to add red tape to anything. The reality is that the county is also going to be audited. Our processes are going to be reviewed. How we manage these funds and allocating them to your groups will be scrutinized by the federal government, and so we don't want to get in trouble either. We don't want your project at risk. We don't want this funding at risk. So everything that we're doing today is saying you have a lot of responsibility in order to receive these funds, and we will do our best to inform you. I will say right now that my expertise is in public procurement. It is not in federal public procurement, and so I'm constantly consulting federal requirements and trying to interpret how the county has to use them when we are funding projects specifically on behalf of the county. When it comes to you guys using these funds, I can inform you of the requirements, but you really need to do your own diligence and make sure that you are comfortable that what you're doing will stand up to any kind of federal audit or any kind of county request for review. So that's just my caveat up front. I am not an expert in federal funding, and we're really just trying to help you get started on the right foot and move forward with these projects. I don't know if, Coral, do you have anything to add at that moment? No? Okay.
Great.
Thanks. So one of the things that we must have for all of these funds is, in the past you used to hear somebody say, what's your DUNS or your cage number? I want to say in like April, the federal government changed away from using a DUNS number. They are using what they call a UEI, a unique entity, I wrote it down, a unique entity identifier. So we are going to, I have some packets, I'm going to give them to every group here. We're going to ask that you fill out that vendor registration. Even if you're already a vendor with Mojave County, we want you to fill that packet out. If you don't have a UEI already, you'll need to go through the process to get one. It doesn't cost you anything to get a UEI. It's just your way of registering with the federal government. And Coral will need those things in order to report to the board on these projects. We will need them in order to update your vendor record and make sure that we can issue a purchase order. So every person, every agency, or every project owner that's represented here today, make sure that you get a vendor registration packet from me so that you can update your vendor record. Having an updated vendor record, it's not just about the UEI. It makes sure that we have the right accounting information if we're using EFT payments, which will process payments more quickly to you. It makes sure that we have the right contact person. Some of the records that I found when we were just trying to set up this meeting were from 10, 15 years ago, and we don't even know if it's the right contact. So that will help all of us make sure we have the most up-to-date information. It will make sure that we can issue your purchase order. It will make sure that finance can process your payments in a timely manner. So the very next thing that we will need from you after this, even if you don't have a funding agreement, you can please work on updating your vendor information while we're working on getting your funding agreement finalized. Then we get into the fun stuff. So all of these federal funds, whether it's the county spending them or it's you guys as project owners that have received subrecipient grants from the county, must follow the federal regulations. You're going to hear me say a lot of times 2 CFR 200 or uniform guidance. It is not easy to read through. I've shared a copy of it with you all because you need to be aware of it. These slides are meant for me just to kind of hit the highlights so that you understand what's important about them. The caveat that I'll give here is I don't know how any of your organizations are incorporated. I don't know if you're quasi-government. I don't know if you've got some articles of incorporation that have procurement policies or procedures. If you have existing policies and procedures related to procurement, you are required to follow whatever is the strictest in the process. So for example, in a moment I'm going to be talking about formal versus informal thresholds. The federal government's formal threshold, I'll have to confirm it, is I think it's $250,000. Mojave County's is $50,000. So all of the federal requirements Once you've risen to the level of formal procurement, we actually have to follow at the level of $50,000 in spend. So you have to do a lot of reconciliation if you have existing procurement policies. Everything that I'm sharing today is assuming that you do not have existing procurement policies, that you are not subject to the state procurement code or any other kind of procurement policies. So you'll need to understand for your programs if you're subject to any other procurement policies. If you are, you'll need to go through the balance of saying which portion is more restrictive. And it's not just, you know, in 200, 318, who's more restrictive, I follow all of those policies. It's each element of it. It's, okay, I have to do a formal procurement at $50,000 for Mojave County, and so Mojave County is more restrictive. But from the federal standpoint, I have to target small women and minority-owned businesses at a formal threshold for the federal government. So at my $50,000 level, the federal government's restrictions are more strict. I would need to target women-owned businesses even at $50,000. So there's a lot that you'll have to do. All of this is assuming that you don't have a procurement code or procurement rules that you need to follow. Have I lost anyone yet? No? Okay, so now I'm going to do a very quick highlight of each of the areas of, sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. So 200-317, basically it says that all state agencies and non-federal entities, including subrecipients, must follow what they call the procurement standards in the 2 CFR 200, sections 200-318 through 200-327. The next slides that I'm going to share with you are sort of my bullet point interpretation of those regulations, and I've provided a handout to you that actually has it printed. I pulled that off of the 2 CFR 200 website yesterday. And I added footnotes anytime they referred to another area of their code, so hopefully it makes it a little bit more clear. So 200-318 just has to do with following general procurement standards consistent with state and local and tribal laws. You need to have policies that prevent conflict of interest. Conflict of interest when it comes to who makes award, organizational conflicts of interest when it comes to the type of work that you're doing. You must award to a responsible contractor. So you will need to do diligence that says that you believe that they are capable of doing the work, that they have the financial capacity to do the work, that they are experienced enough to do the work. It's not just a matter of whoever's the lowest bid. If you don't have confidence that they can do the work, you'll need to look at the things that are covered in 200-318 and say, is there anything in here that makes me think this is not a responsible contractor? If not, then you should not be awarding to them. You must maintain records of your procurement process. And this is, I think, a hang up for a lot of people that are used to private sector. You're not going to be able just to go out and pick someone. You're going to have to go through a fair competitive process that is not restrictive, that there's enough time for people to offer, to get multiple offers to ensure that there's competition. And as part of the checklist that Coral's going to go over, we will require that you provide backup to us that will satisfy us that you've gone through a procurement process in accordance with 2 CFR 200, that you've received multiple offers or at least multiple interests, and that you've evaluated bids or proposals in a fair and transparent manner. So just be aware of that. Make sure that you read through the regulations. 200-319, again, is about full and open competition. We're actually going to have a slide even at the end of my portion of the presentation that goes over this again, but contractors that develop specifications for your projects are precluded from being part of those who offer on the project itself. So if you have a company that may be a construction company that has an engineer on staff and they say, hey, we'll do the drawings or we'll write the specs for this, that contracting company would not be able to offer on the work. So be mindful of that when you're working through these projects. We don't want you to prevent someone that might be able to do the work from being able to offer because they sat down and met with you and went through specifications or helped create drawings. That would be a conflict of interest and it would not be acceptable under the 2 CFR 200 requirements. No restrictive requirements in your bid document. So you can't really do brand name specifications unless you have lots of justification. And I would say we would want Mojave County to approve that brand name specification. You can't have restrictive things like geographical preferences that you must live within so many miles of the project in order to be on it. Really, all of this is about increasing as much competition as possible on the project so that we ensure that we're spending government dollars wisely. Yes, they're federal government dollars, but we still want to make sure they're being spent wisely. And that when you go out to bid for a project, the parameters of your project need to be clear, accurate requirements. You can't just kind of go out with a vague, we're doing a water well. You need to be able to let them know exactly what you need in a water well, exactly what the specifications are, so that you will end up with an apples to apples comparison. Whew. 200-320 has to deal with your method of procurement. This is one of those areas where I say, this is the federal minimum requirements, but if you have requirements that apply to your organization, follow those requirements when it comes to informal processes. Informal processes don't require public competition, don't require legal publication, and they don't require as intensive of a process. And you'll hear us use words micro purchase or micro procurements. The federal government determines anything that's $10,000 or less. You can move forward when you receive a quote that you've determined is fair and reasonable of $10,000 or less. You don't need to get multiple quotes. You don't need to have any process for competing. If you reach out to somebody and they say, I can do that portion of the work for you for $8,000, and that's within your estimate, you're acceptable to move forward on that. Once it rises above $10,000, but if it stays under $250,000, and a lot of your total projects are in this realm, so congratulations to you, your job will be a little bit more simple. You do need to go through a competitive process, but it doesn't have to be a formal competitive process. It doesn't have to be formal sealed bids. It doesn't have to be publicly opened. It doesn't have to be publicly advertised. You can reach out to 3 contractors with specifications, get quotes, and award to the lowest responsible contractor, and you will have met the minimum requirements. Anything under $250,000. I like the caution on here. I don't know if it looks like it to you guys. It was lime green when we presented this. The caution is do not split your procurements artificially just so that you don't rise to those levels. So for the projects that are the $1 million projects or $500,000 projects, if there's a legitimate reason to split the work, if one contractor does one type of thing and another contractor does another type of thing, that's an acceptable reason to split work. But for example, the project that's 6 generators, you can't say, well, I'm gonna buy 1 generator this month and 1 generator next month and 1 generator the following month so that it's considered a small purchase. If you know you're buying 6 generators and 1 vendor can supply that need, then you need to include all 6 generators in the procurement. You cannot artificially break them up. That would be going against federal requirements. And we're going to say it on the next slide, which is what rises to what we would call formal procurement methods. Formal procurement methods are anything that exceeds $250,000 in value. You are required to advertise publicly. Mojave County meets those requirements by taking out a legal ad in a newspaper of circulation. It's published it's published weekly. You can do things like post it on a board in your area. You can do things like email it out to the public. But the goal of public advertisement is that even if there's a contractor that could meet your need that you don't know, it's an opportunity for them to see it and say, hey, I could offer on that. I can put a bid in on that. It provides to them the information on where to submit bids. Formal methods that are approved are either sealed bid, which is the preferred method for the federal government. If you can clearly define your specifications, you can clearly define what you need, and a lump sum or unit price bid will work. If that's a way that you can manage the project, the expectation is that you will go through a sealed bid process. If for any reason, things like design just don't work for a sealed bid process. You need to look at the qualifications of the firm. You need to make sure that they meet certain minimum requirements. That is what the federal government considers requests for proposals. And again, the handout that I gave you has way more in depth of what they would require, but in a situation where you're doing a request for proposals, it's awarded to the responsive, responsible offerer that offers the most advantageous proposal. So if you're going through a proposal process, you don't necessarily have to award to the lowest bidder. You have to award to the best overall proposal. Who is most qualified and can do it for a fair and reasonable price, not necessarily giving it to the guy that's sort of qualified but is a whole lot cheaper. And you have to clearly define how you're going to evaluate those things prior to receiving responses. So just be prepared for any contract that you are planning to award with these dollars that exceeds $250,000, you will need to go through a formal process. And if you are struggling with any of that, you can reach out to your main contact, either Joanne or Don. And if they need guidance from us, they will reach out to us. Again, I'm not an expert in how you guys can approach procurement, but I can at least share with you, if this were a county project, this is how we would handle it. So we want to help you, but we cannot do the work for you. Moving on to the next one. There are affirmative steps that are required. I believe that these are only required for those formal projects, but they're encouraged for the informal projects, and that is including small minority or women-owned businesses on your solicitations. So it's required for formal projects. It's really simple. It's as simple as looking for those at the federal level. At Mojave County, we'll often go to the GSA, the General Service something or other, I can't even remember what it's called right now, but it's how the federal government manages their contracts. We'll go there and look for anywhere that it has a designation that somebody is certified as a small minority or women-owned business, and if it's somebody that could provide the service to us, we just put them on our target list. It's just showing that we're giving opportunity to those businesses to operate. They encourage you working with like chambers of commerce, with different organizations in your area that work with those kinds of businesses, just to make sure that you're notifying them that there's an opportunity. You don't have to award to them. It's not set aside goals. It's nothing like that. It's just saying that you're giving them an opportunity to offer, because really the intent of this, it is the American Rescue Plan Act. It's to get money out there into the community. They encourage maximum participation from small and minority and women-owned businesses. It also will require that any of your contracts with prime contractors, that you include terminology or terms and conditions within your contract, that they give opportunities to these types of contractors. So just make sure that you've got affirmative action language in your requirements. Again, it's not a preference. It's just saying that you're giving them an opportunity and that you're directly targeting them so that they know that these opportunities are available. I'm about halfway done. 322 has to deal with domestic preference. Essentially, it's the preference for the use of goods and products or materials that are produced in the United States. The requirement must be included in any contracts. When you look through the documents that I've given you, that is part of the Appendix 2. Again, there's nothing that says we must certify that they are using American-made goods or services. It's that we are informing them that we want them as a contractor to provide a preference for domestically produced products. And so those terms and conditions are in any of our federal contracts. We would request that you put them in yours as well, showing that you've let the contractors know if they have to choose between, I don't know, wood that was produced in New Mexico or in Mexico versus wood produced here in the United States, that even if it means they pay a little bit more, that they would buy their wood here in the United States. That's all that requirement is. The next one's also an interesting one. I don't have any experience with this whatsoever, but we do include these terms and conditions in our contract. It is a requirement that if applicable, contractors must comply with the requirements of Section 6002 of the Waste Disposal Act. That term and condition has been provided to you. Make sure that you include it in your contracts. I don't think it's something that's ever come up for us, but it is a preference for using, I think it was post-consumer materials if possible. 324 is cost and price analysis. This one is actually a really important one that even we at the county sometimes struggle with when it comes to federal funds. So before you make any kind of procurement decision that's going out to bid for a contract or making contract modifications, you need to do an independent cost estimate. You'll hear me call it an ICE. Basically what we do at the county is we'll do an engineer's estimate on projects, and based on that engineer's estimate, we don't disclose it to bidders. We don't say, we estimate this project's gonna cost $330,000. We say, hey, we've got a construction range between, $100,000 and $500,000, just so they know the project size. But when the bids come in, we're comparing those bids to our engineer's estimate, and we're doing an analysis of the bid and saying, if it's over our engineer's estimate, what did we miss, or should we be awarding this project? If it's under the engineer's estimate, then we're saying, great, we thought it would cost this much, we got a good deal, but we've documented all of that. If we have to do change orders, if you're in the middle of a project and something unforeseen comes up and you need to make a modification to the contract, your subject matter expert in that field should be on site saying, we need, I don't know, our well casing failed and we need to get more well casing. And based on my understanding of the market, we think it's going to cost this much to get new well casing. That needs to be documented and in your records prior to reaching out to your prime contractor to get a price. All of this is just to ensure that we're thinking about these things before we just agree to do a change order to the contract. So I would just say, make sure that's in the back of your head for any of your project managers, that anytime you're making a modification or a decision to make a change in procurement, that you are making an independent estimate. If you have someone on staff that can do it, great. If not, you can engage with a consultant and say, we just need you to tell us what this will be. I will tell you on some of ours, we've done as simple as saying, well, we went out to bid for this already and their square foot price was blah, blah, blah. We're just gonna do some math and say, based on the square foot price that we got before, this is what we think it'll be. And because prices are going up in the market, we're gonna add 10% to that. That's fine, just as long as you've got documentation that shows you've been thinking about price before you reached out to a contractor to get their price. The other part with cost price analysis, if you are using the proposal method to enter into a contract, and you're going to have profit as part of that, profit actually needs to be separately negotiated. So when we do construction bids, we just do lump sum bid and we say cover everything, all your overhead costs in your bid. That's fine when your decision is primarily based on cost. If you're doing a proposal method and you're saying, well, you're the most qualified and now we want to enter into negotiations with you, it needs to be very clear in the pricing document what portion of profit they have and that you've negotiated profit with them. So they can't just say, my price is this much and that includes my profit overhead. You need to say, yes, but what element of that is profit? A lot of times we'll just do that as a percentage of overall price. And you would just need to show records that you negotiated that separately. And the county does not allow, the federal government does not allow cost plus percentage of cost or percentage of construction type contracts. So you can't say, our budget for this project for construction is $100,000. Consultant, you can give me your proposal, and as long as you say it's 8% of the construction value, we'll accept it. That's not allowable. You need to independently negotiate based on the scope of work they're actually doing for you. And then the other piece of that is, like with a change order, you can't say, whatever you need to do, go buy the material and we'll give you a 10% markup. That would be frowned on in the federal government. So again, they need to give you an actual proposal that says, we think it will cost this much to do that work. Any questions so far while I take a breath? No? Okay. The next one is 200-325. This is just saying that the pass-through agency, that is us, Mojave County, has the right to request a review of any of your technical specifications. So if we have any concerns about your procurement process, if we have any concerns about your award of a contract, we have the right to request a review of items like your procurement standards and your compliance with the federal procurement standards or your own procurement standards, to look at the formal methods that you've used and have you met the requirements of those formal methods? Have you used restrictive specifications? And if you've been doing contract modifications, we have the right to request review of those records. I know Coral's going to talk a little bit about records. That's part of us wanting you to know up front that you need to keep really good records, because if something comes up and things seem a little bit questionable, we may come to you and say, we need to review what you've done. That's not for us to be the watchdog or make things difficult for you. If we think a project might be going off the rails, we want to get there right away and let you know. We've had this on some of our ARPA projects where we've said, I'm sorry, you actually can't award the contract in this way, so you need to go back to your board and let them know that that award is not appropriate, and you'll need to cancel that award and go through an approved process. We don't like doing it at that point. So if there's ever a time that you're not sure, by all means reach out to Don or Joanne, or if you get to a point and you think, oh my gosh, we might have messed this up, don't just push forward and hope that nobody sees it. By all means reach out to us. We're here to make sure that these projects stay successful. And then for any construction projects valued over $250,000, you will be required to get bonds, and these are the minimum requirements for bonds. So when you are accepting bids, you will need a bid guarantee or a bid bond equivalent to at least 5% of the total bid price. I will tell you Mojave County standard is 10% of bid price. That's acceptable, but the minimum required bond is 5% of bid price. And this is nothing new to contractors. They will be able to get you bid bonds. They will be able to get you payment and performance bonds. Just know that you need to include those provisions in your contract and that you'll need to verify that you have acceptable bonds for any of your projects. For payment and performance bonds, it's at 100% of the contract value. So prior to moving forward with the project, you will need to receive performance and payment bonds at 100% of the contract value. They usually cannot get those bonds until after they've been notified that they're going to be awarded a contract. So it's just one of those things that once you have awarded a contract for these services, they should not be moving forward on any work until you're satisfied and you have a certified copy of their payment and performance bonds. And again, I would say keep those records in your procurement records. Those are there to protect you and to protect our interest in funding your projects. We may need copies of them. They help. If something goes wrong in your project, your performance bond is going to ensure that you have a way to get the contract completed if your contractor fails. Your payment bond ensures that their subs will get paid, even if they fail to pay them. So they're all surety that are there to protect the agency, to protect the funds that are being invested in these projects. And finally, my last piece is that all contracts must include the Appendix 2 terms and conditions. I've shared that with you. These terms and conditions have to do with administrative, contractual, legal remedies. You need to make sure that there are terms and conditions in your contracts so that any contractor knows what they will do if there ends up being some kind of dispute in the middle of the contract. You need to have termination for cause and termination for convenience. Termination for cause says you've done something to breach the contract and now we can terminate the contract. Termination for convenience says if for some reason we lose funds, we can terminate the contract. If for some reason you fail to meet requirements and we say you can't have this money anymore, you need to be able to cancel your contracts and only be held responsible for the work done to that date. You need to have the equal employment opportunity clause. I've provided all the verbiage to you. Contract work hours and safety standards, and then rights to inventions made under the contract. Again, these are almost like boilerplate terms and conditions, but make sure that they are in there. I don't think any of you are going to have inventions based off of your water wells, but it's better to have it in there and not need it than not have it in there and find out that something is not right. You'll need Clean Air Act, the debarment and suspension clause. This is something that Coral's going to cover. Any award, you will need to check and make sure that the contractor you're planning to award to has not been debarred or suspended in the federal system for award management, I think, it's SAM. You need to have the Byrd anti-lobbying amendment included. You will need procurement of recovered materials. That's that waste one that I covered earlier. You'll need the prohibition on certain telecommunications and video surveillance services of equipment. This has something to do with sort of the Department of Justice. I just say put it in there. You probably are not at risk at all of not meeting that, but make sure the clause is in your contract. And then that domestic preference clause that says that they will prefer domestically produced products. And then this is just, again, another reminder that really a huge focus of this, we need to see that you've had full and open competition. And so things that might restrict full open competition would be having unreasonable requirements in your specifications. If you're going out to bid only for a particular brand of well or a particular model, that would be considered restrictive. Requiring unnecessary experience or unnecessary bonding. So if you go out to bid for, I don't know, an engineer and you say must have 20 years of experience in designing wells, that would be seen as restrictive. If you say must have 3 years of experience, that's not restrictive, but that's saying a lot of people could meet this requirement, but we're doing our diligence to ensure that you're responsible. So you just can't have wildly overinflated experience requirements that just make it so only 1 or 2 people can offer. And then the bonding requirements, I would say, stick to at the minimum federal or maybe go up to 10% for bid bonds. If you say in order to offer on this project, we need a 50% bid bond, you're restricting competition and there's really no reason for that. No non-competitive pricing practices, no non-competitive contracts to contracts that you have on retainer. So when you jump into the realm of spending government dollars, my dad does concrete for a living, and when I'm spending my own money, I can tell you without a doubt that my money is going to go to my dad's business to pour my concrete. If I'm spending government money, my dad is not even targeted for it because there's conflict there and because I can't just say, well, he's on retainer, I know that he'll do it. So even if within your organizations you have like on-call contracts or just relationships with contractors that you know you can call up at a moment's notice and they'll come make a repair to the well, that is not the basis for selecting them for these projects. By all means, you can target them and give them an opportunity, but you can't just call up someone that you work with all the time and say, come do this work for me. That's considered a non-competitive contract. You need to be making sure that you look for organizational conflicts. I know we've said a couple times today that Joanne is going to manage the chloride well project. The reason Joanne is managing the chloride well project is we realize that we have staff in Public Works that does something on the board for the chloride well program, yeah. And so we are making sure that there is no weird organizational conflict there, that someone within the county that might work with you might have influence over a decision that we wouldn't be fair with someone else. So whatever you need to do to make sure that there are no organizational conflicts of interest, and document. Even in the county, we'll do things where we say, sign off that there's not a conflict, and report to me. If you think that it might be a conflict, I mean, honestly, you reported to us as soon as you saw this project and said, this might be a conflict. I will tell you, I honestly don't think it's a conflict, but we are going above and beyond to say we're going to remove any kind of appearance of conflict. So please be careful with organizational conflicts of interest. Don't specify brand name products. If there's absolutely a reason it must be brand name, that is something that you'll want to either go to Joanne or Don and say, hey, we need to use brand name, and here's why. They will forward it to us. We will review it. If we agree with you, I'd be comfortable writing a memo that says, hey, they've got justification for this, put this in their project file and you can move forward. But don't just assume you can do a brand name specification. And then just any arbitrary action in the procurement process could put these things at risk. So just make sure that you're looking at this to be the most open, full, transparent process as possible, and you'll be okay. I think I just boiled about 15 years of procurement experience into 5 minutes, or maybe a little bit more than 5 minutes. Do you guys have any questions before we move into the reporting and the financial element of this? We will have an opportunity for questions at the end as well if I've just overwhelmed you, but is it making sense? Do you have any concerns? Have I bored you? Sure.
Projects being combined with other entities that are doing projects so that we do a larger project to bid on and consolidate costs of administrative overhead.
So actually, this was kind of brought to my attention as a possibility. What I would say is one of the ways that you can be restrictive in competition is if you try to combine things that nobody can offer on. The ARPA guidance actually encourages combining where it makes sense. And so if there are areas that makes sense, I think we'd be fine with that. If you each want to work together and say, here's how we're gonna run our projects, and maybe we have a consultant help us get it together, as long as the type of work being done is something that wouldn't end up limiting competition. So I can't really tell you exactly how to do it. There is definitely, I will tell you in the county, there's a lot of times that we'll have the conversation and say, do we really need to go out to bid for, I don't know, chips and aggregate for one road, or should we pool everything together and say this year we plan to do this much with chips and aggregate? So there's benefit to getting economy of scale. Sometimes it's risky if the projects are so different that you may accidentally be limiting competition to only 1 or 2 companies that can do all of the work. So I would just say assess it that way, but if there are projects that it makes sense, the other struggle sometimes might be geography. We might think there's a benefit to going out to bid, like maybe we have some sidewalk work that needs to be done in Bullhead and some sidewalk work that needs to be done in Havasu. We might think at the county, well, let's put that all together in one bid document, because if we get one contractor, it'll save us money. But really it won't, because now they have to mobilize to Bullhead and they have to mobilize to Havasu, and there's really no benefit to them because the cost of doing the project is the same whether we bid it separately or together, and we might actually get a better deal from someone who's in Bullhead on the Bullhead project and someone who's in Havasu on the Havasu project. So I don't know if I answered your question very well, but really kind of think through it before you do it.
One of the issues that we have in our firms is that a lot of times contractors don't want to come out there. And if we collaborate, then, you know, they got 2 wells put in the same area, and
The problem that we're having is if anybody feels a bid at all.
Yeah.
So as far as competition, I don't know how you can have competition with like one drilling company.
So I would say on the smaller projects, it's a matter of requesting it and having documentation that you requested it and who you sent it to. And what you could do is you could require and say, if you're not planning to offer on this, please reply to me and say, I'm not bidding and this is why. Now you've got documentation that you've attempted a competitive process. But I don't want to get too much in the weeds. I would say you need to attempt competition. If once you've attempted it, you only get one offer, then go back to the drawing board, let our county staff know, here's where we at, we only got one offer. We can work with them to say, is there a way for us to document that you went through an appropriate process and that a quote unquote non-competitive award is acceptable because you only got one offer. The federal government sees only one response to a bid as a non-competitive process. In Mojave County, as long as we can show that you tried to get multiple bids, we would consider it a competitive process. So if that happens, if you only get one offer, by all means, don't move forward with the award, reach out to your program, to your county contact person, let them know what's going on, they will work with us, and we will do what we can to either document and justify that you've done what you could and that we agree that a non-competitive award makes sense. Just don't try to make that decision on your own, move forward with an award, and then submit a reimbursement to Coral because she's gonna deny it, and then we're gonna be in an ugly situation, so. But when it comes to combining, I mean, if there are, I would just say make sure that it makes sense geographically and the type of work. Like, I don't see you combining work with a generator contract when you're drilling a well, but if there's 3 wells being drilled, it might make sense to say, hey, can you offer on all 3 of these? Even knowing that you're going to have to mobilize, it might make it more attractive for a well driller to say, look, I can come and be in the area over the course of, you know, a month and a half, 2 months, and hit all of them and actually make a little bit of money. Anything else?
Chairman, might repeat the question into my
Yeah. Okay.
The projects be done by design build if it's technical professional prepared set of
My recommendation is not to do a design build process. I don't see anywhere, sorry, the question was, can they do a design build process? I don't see anywhere in the CFRs that it allows for that type of process. They're actually very restrictive on what they will allow for even architects and engineers that request for proposals. I think it would be very hard to document and get approval. And I will say the struggle with the ARPA funding from a federal use perspective, I've worked with FTA funds, and we actually have someone designated that we can take that question to an FTA person at the federal level and say, hey, we're thinking about doing a design build process. Can you bless this in advance? And then I'd say, sure, go ahead and do it. There's nobody assigned at that level from ARPA funding, so there's no one that we can even go to and say, is this acceptable? So I would say design build is probably not an option. I know, like with HUD funding, they're not okay with design build. With federal funding, they're okay with design build, but in a very particular way so that they know that price can be part of the competition. My advice, if I were doing this for the county, is that we would not do design build. I think it's too risky.
When we get a copy of the county's qualified technical professional list for how much using it.
So I feel weird, I keep repeating your questions. The question was, can you get a copy of our pre-qualified technical registrants list? Absolutely. Email Dawn or Joanne, whoever your contact is, I think it's Dawn. Dawn, you can reach out to us and we'll share. We go through the process annually, but we'll share our most current list. It really is just a list of technical registrants who have submitted their statements of qualification. I would say don't limit it to that because it's not a traditional pre-qualified, but it'll definitely give you a list of vendors to target for any kind of process.
If we do not use a pre-qualified technical professional for the county list, is it a method of hiring one technical professional competitive bid request for qualifications process, or just fix it?
No, if you read through the 203 whatever methods of procurement, what you would be doing would be the proposal, the technical proposal method, or I think they just call it proposal, but I will tell you the federal requirements just say you must go through that process. They don't give you a great idea of how to go through that process. Within Mojave County, we would do an RFQ. You could probably search our website and find a sample of an RFQ that we've done and kind of use that as a template. Again, make sure that it's specific to your organization, make sure it's specific to what you are evaluating. But in order to get an architect engineer, the process is a proposal and a scored proposal where you're looking at elements other than price and you're awarding to the most advantageous offer. But it's a competitive process. You cannot just pick someone.
If any part of the project is performed by our staff, the bidding to be paid prevailing wage.
So the question is, if members of the staff perform any of the work, do they need to be paid prevailing wage? My blanket answer is that the ARPA guidance has said that Davis-Bacon is not required. You don't need to certify any kind of prevailing wage, but there's an encouragement to pay, I don't think they said prevailing wages, but pay adequate wages. So you're not required to certify anything Davis-Bacon, but pay appropriate wages. Correct. Davis-Bacon is not a requirement under ARPA. What project is yours? Mount Timpton will be done. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to you, Coral. I will come back up for more questions once Coral's through her piece.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, and again, thanks for being here. In this section, I'll try to move it right along, but we'll really kind of cover 4 topics: the fiscal oversight, expenditure controls, what we do for internal controls or what's required, some of the questions that will be asked of you, and then actually going through your payment request, the type of documentation that will be necessary to submit to the county. So kicking this off, first of all, you need to know that you've got to be prepared to be audited. If your agency reaches a threshold of more than $750,000 in federal funds during a fiscal year, then you are also going to need to go through the efforts and pay for a single audit. Some of you, it looks like the chloride, I believe, is over, it's up to $1 million. There's another project that was 500-some thousand, I forget which one that was, but we don't know what your conditions are at each of your units, at each of your entity level. You may have received other types of federal funds through the year, or you may be planning on it. You may be applying for water infrastructure loans and things like that that also involve federal funds. So it's not just money from Mojave County that's being passed through, it is aggregate. So all federal funds that might be flowing through your organization, if that fits the definition of what you're doing in the scope of your business line overall, then you need to consider that you may have to go for a single audit. Regardless, going through the risk assessment, the lower threshold of controls that you have established, accounting controls within each of your organizations, the higher the risk, of course. The higher the risk, the more likely an audit. And not that that needs to be scary, it's just some extra work. And requires you to make sure that you have your documents in order and that you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's, so to speak, from the financial perspective, particularly, and in meeting the thresholds that are governed by the procurement requirements. The method of let's say that it's a program that it's not subject to the single audit, that it's just going to be a program audit. We presume at this point that the federal government would be contacting Mojave County first, and then we would be working together in tandem as we work through that program audit, and that will be coming out on site. They'll be looking at the assets, they will be looking at all the paperwork, the items that Tara's just went through for procurement, the purchase orders that you've issued to the contractor, all of your invoices, your approval processes and things like that, all the way through that project. So I just want you to, not be fearful of that. but be prepared for that. And from that standpoint, it's important to know that ARPA monies cannot be utilized to pay for any audit cost, or if you have to incur a single audit, you will have to contract with an independent CPA firm to conduct the audit, and you would need to pay for that, the cost of that, with your own funds or with some other source of funding. The county goes through a single audit process, and it's about $15,000 to $20,000 a year for Mojave County. So it's not cheap by any means, but it wouldn't necessarily put an agency, I would hope, in the hole if they have to spend money to go through that. But it is something that you need to evaluate before you accept the funds, of what kind of extra work effort and money is it going to take on our part to get through this process. And if you've already been through an audit, whether that be, I listed some examples here, it might be a sales tax audit, might be a withholding audit from the IRS. It could be that you've received other grants or technical grants through the Water Infrastructure Authority, or I'm not sure. I'm assuming that it's unlikely that you've been through a federal audit before, but you may have. If you've had an audit in the last few years, or if there's anything on the horizon, please let the county know about that, and that will require us to look through the document basically and note the outcome of the audit, or if there's any findings, how you approach the findings, resolving the findings, and some things like that. One of the questions that are part of the oversight, the county does have to do a risk assessment. Risk assessments are supposed to occur before we embark on any adventure with you. Clearly, there's already been a funding agreement it's already been to the board to approve the project. Many of you have already signed funding agreements. Some of you have that underway. We have not done a risk assessment. We haven't asked you questions. And so in many cases, we're going to have to still close the circle by doing that in arrears, even if we don't get out the gate with these risk assessments. But the questions that you're going to be asked are about, do you have procedures in place if you have ever had an audit finding, or what would you do what are your plans in the event that there is an audit finding? And then, of course, the federal government is quite interested in procedures in place for any of the subrecipients on if you've proactively taken steps to help prevent fraud or detect fraud, prevent abuse, waste of resources and dollars and things like along that line. In moving into out of the audit section and the components for that, some of the questions that you're going to be asked, and so I know that you can read. I'm going to go ahead and read some of these to you so that you've heard this. Again, you don't need to be fearful if all of your answers are no, we don't do that, no, we don't do that, no, we don't do that. It's going to move you, again, into a higher risk category, but at least you can think about compensating controls. Maybe we don't have this formally, this isn't the way that we formally do certain things, or we don't have this segregation of duty, the way that we have an approval process. We've got one person doing common things. We understand that can happen, even at Mojave County, with a lot of employees. Some things, there's not a lot of segregation within certain departments. So you have to kind of just be prepared to answer those questions and think about what ways could you improve that, or what ways do you have compensating controls? You have a board oversight of the manager, and the manager oversight of the bookkeeper, and things like that may help. So we would want you to be ready for those kind of questions. One of this list here of questions are that they're going to be asking, or we are going to be asking you on behalf of the federal government, do you have a chart of accounts? What type of accounting system are you using to record your financial transactions? And how do you plan right now to keep the federal monies that are spent on this project separate from other funds that you may be putting forth a project. If your entire project is funded with these monies, it's a little easier from that standpoint that 100% of these costs are going to be borne by the ARPA dollars. However, you still have to track those within your accounting system separately. Your system might be Excel spreadsheets, it might be pencil and paper. I don't know what the sophistication level is. It might be that you pay a bookkeeper, a CPA office, an accountant, somebody to do things separately, and we'll just need to know what that is, and you'll need to have that documented as well in your records ultimately. Doesn't have to be a major deal. It can be 2 sentences. And some of the other information that's relevant that we're going to need to know, you're going to need to document how you go about providing authorizations for receipts and expenditures to get through your accounting system. And this is particularly relevant to these ARPA expenditures. So your authorizations, your obligations, how are you encumbering and setting aside the dollars that's going to be required to pay for these projects. Clearly, a lot of this money is coming from ARPA, I would assume, but you need to really just advise whether you have a method of keeping track of that money, what you budgeted for each of the components, and how you know what's remaining in your obligations. Same for program expenses, income, and then the balances that you still have remaining, so there's a tracking mechanism for that. Other questions that are going to come up that you're going to be asked are things like this. Do you have controls in place that will prevent an over obligation of the funds? How are you going to ensure that you're not exceeding your budget and the ARPA dollars for some of these projects through change orders and things like that? This happens at our level as well, where we encounter differences once we're underway than what was anticipated in the original plans, and what happens if now the cost exceeds and now we've exceeded this obligation. The amounts, this might be really critical to you. I don't know what your bank balances are, but if we've given you a specified amount or allocated a specified amount and it exceeds that, how would you go about paying for the remainder of that project? So it is something to be really mindful of, to make sure that you've designated contingencies in the event that that can occur. And it's rather amazing how often that can happen. We also want to know how you go through preventing duplicate payments, how you prevent charging to the project costs that might be unallowable, and ensuring that you're not making a payment to an entity that is debarred or suspended. And I don't know if any of you already utilize the federal government system for doing any of this, but you're gonna have to show formal evidence that you've gone through some of these efforts. And we'll get back into the debarred or suspended list here in a minute. You're also going to be asked a series of questions on internal controls, including who prepares the payment request for your organizations, for your expenses, who prepares your deposits, who approves your cash receipts, and are those different people that's preparing the deposit and approving the cash receipt and recording it. Sometimes it's the same person. We're gonna need to know that. You're gonna need to put it into your record that you're aware of that and the risk area that it puts you into. The other types of questions clearly are going to be who's signing the checks, who's maintaining your general ledger, and what staff people or volunteers are completing your bank reconciliations, and who sees the bank reconciliations. And are your board members seeing the bank statements and the reconciliations, or a combination thereof? It's important for this to be identified really pretty early on, so that you can attest to compensating controls, if you will. So in moving into that area, it's a good segue. If if your control process right now is that we have one person who does a lot of the paperwork internally, this person might be receiving the bills, they're doing the billing to the water customers, they are creating the deposits, they're doing the accounting, they're working with our accounting firm to prepare financial statements, whatever the gamut is, then again, you're going to be asked to explain any other internal controls that you have in place to mitigate just one or two people that are involved in the process. And then another critical question, what controls are in place when individuals in these positions of trust are on leave or otherwise unavailable? Who's going to carry the baton while they are out, or if they have an emergency? What plans do you have for the project to go on? Payments to continue to be remitted, activity to occur and be recorded properly if that person is out of the office. And again, another question asked, do you allow for advance signing of checks and how you go about getting approvals for those payments? So that was a lot of questions, and if you will, right there, that the example of questions. The actual risk assessment samples that are out there on the internet, you're more than welcome to review. That's precisely what I'm doing. The county does have some departments locally that are involved in being they are the recipient. They are performing services through federal funds, and as the subrecipients ourselves, we answer these questions. So we can certainly help you answer some of the questions that may arise. But when Tara was first speaking about the information received from the federal government, mostly it was, we're going to set aside these monies for good purposes, but it didn't, and it came with guidance, but it was a lot of, 454 pages of written materials that did not include templates on what to provide, not to provide to us, not for us to provide to you, and so on. And there's more than 1,000 local governments that are in the same position where we're now, for the first time ever, performing as a monitoring agency of a subrecipient. And difficult, it's been quite difficult to bring all of that information together to hand you out a packet of information and ensure that there's understanding between them, us, you, in terms of what hoops we have to jump through to ensure that we're all protected from really having any findings or repaying these funds. So moving on to the payment process, we did develop a payment template that we would like for you to use, that we're going to request that you use until we find that it isn't working or something doesn't make sense on this anymore. But the template was crafted after the same template that the Arizona Water Infrastructure Finance Authority hands out when you apply for their funding. And your contacts will email you that information, those spreadsheets. I think it looks a little intimidating initially, but once you actually kind of get into it, oh, this is the part I fill out. The formulas calculate across the way. The information will roll mostly onto the front page of that, and it will allow you to see a summary of what you initially budgeted for the projects, the various categories that you budgeted in for your projects, your design and engineering, if you had project management, the materials pieces. I'm not sure exactly how these are going to flesh out for you, but there are individual tabs for that, and we can show you what that looks like. And again, the points of contact will be available when you're actually filing in that level to help you complete those. I believe that we even had one entity right now where our department, they're just sending it in pencil and paper. So they've printed the format off, and then they've penciled it in and sent it back to their person at the county, and that person is inputting that information into the spreadsheet on their behalf. So that's not going to be the favorite alternative, but there can be certainly some of you that are going to say, I don't know how to use Excel, and I need some help. When you send in your request for payment, you're going to have to provide not only this, just this summary information, but we're going to need the documentation that you've obtained that include things such as the invoices that are coming in, and that you've looked at the invoices and somebody signed off from your agency that the invoice makes sense. So if the invoice comes back, and we've already seen one of these, it said, oh, this is 100% completed, and it doesn't make sense to you, don't sign off that we're going to pay this to our contractor for 100% of this component if they haven't completed 100%. Then, reply back that, could you explain how it's at 100%, because we still see that it's a partial way. So you've certainly got a dog in the fight in working with your contractor to determine that. I know that the county intends to have project managers assigned and to come on site as well. But just do your very best at attaching the documents where you're at, that you've approved, and by then you will have known, what is our approval process for this? And do we have 2 people looking at it at least? Send that in. We're going to need any statements that you have, not statements like word statements, but financial statements that are related, maybe an entity. Sometimes, for example, legal services, if you end up needing an attorney to work on things, or an engineering firm will give you a statement along with some backup material. So that's what I mean by statements at this point. You may have to submit photos, any other documentation evidencing that what you're sending to us is currently due. Knowing that all of you are in funding agreement capacity, we do understand, I'll just repeat it, I guess, for clarification, make sure that at least those of us here are agreeing that what I believe anyway is going to occur, you're going to go through the process, engage the contractors or vendors that are going to be doing the work. They will give you invoices for their construction to date or their activities work to date. You will review it, you will sign off on it. Your process that you have told us you're following will be evident. You will submit it to the county. In this case, it'll be either Don or Joanne. They will review that with the county's project managers as well. Then we will remit payment to you, and then you will, in a timely fashion, so that you will then have the funds to pay the contractor, hopefully without incurring any additional costs is the goal. So we don't want you to incur any penalties or interest or anything like that that a contractor may claim due, that that it sat in the county office for 45 days and now you're late on a payment. Absolutely, that is our goal, not to do that. So please work with us to ensure if something is missed. I assume that a lot of information will be exchanged in emails, and I think we all know sometimes it's out in cyberland that we put a .com instead of a .us, or in my case, sometimes I forget to push send and it's sitting in my own queue and draft. So I want you to be certainly pressing us if we do not respond back to you in a timely fashion. And then subsequent to, assuming that all of that flows really well, then subsequent to that occurring, you pay the contractor. Once that payment has cleared your bank to directly pay the contractor, then you will need to provide proof of payment, and that evidence is that you spent the funds and exactly what you said you were going to spend it. They used to do this back in the day with bank loans. I don't know if they still do that, but Absolutely, the federal government requires us to do that. The county government requires you to do that. That is a way of making sure that the funds aren't going and being utilized somewhere else. They're not being remitted to you, used for something else, and then the contractor results in a claim that he's never been paid, he or she has never been paid. And in addition, and going back to a couple of items that we've mentioned and that Tara mentioned early on, when you remit the information to the county, because we're also going to be keeping a copy of your records for, a few reasons. One, we have to do this anyway. It's incumbent upon us to make sure that that occurs. Two, if there's an emergency event that occurs where you store your records and they're wiped out by water, fire, wind, I don't know, if some reason they're gone, then the county has a backup record as well. And it's critical because these are federal dollars. When the audit time comes, it's probably not going to be next year. It may not be 2 years. It might be 3 years. It might be 4 years. We really don't know when. We know that the ARPA timeline for committing funds is through the end of December 2024. And we don't know who's going to be picked, of all of the entities that are involved, what they're going to want to see. So there will be multiple records. We need to make sure that included in your record is the check within the System of Awards Management, we call it SAM, that there's been a look to make sure that your vendors are not on the debarred and suspended list. Now, I have personal experience going through that when I worked at another government agency, and these regulations first came about. The staff where I was at absolutely looked it up. We had been trained in this. They looked it up, and naturally, the vendor did not appear on the list. I mean, very few really are. I would be shocked, actually, if any of the vendors that you end up procuring show up on that list as excluded. But if they did, then you would need to have evidence anyway that, A, we can't contract with them, they're on this list. And when we were audited, we said, yeah, of course we looked it up. We have it in our policy now. This is the procedure that we went about doing it. And they said, well, did you print the screen? No, we didn't print the screen. And we had grant administrators, and I was actually the first to be asked, and I'm not quite sure what they did. I contacted them, they said, what are you talking about? No, we didn't print the screen. And we just looked them up. That's what the regulations require. It actually says that you're ensuring that they're not on that list. We ensured they were not on the list. So we didn't get an audit finding because we fought really hard about saying, it does not say that we have to print the screen. If we documented in our record that they were not on the list, and at the time the department were having pre-construction meetings, and they required the contractors to actually sign off on a certification that I am not on the debarred and suspended list. And I don't know if we do that here or not, but that definitely was occurring. So I would ask you, lesson learned, we got out of that audit finding because we argued about it and then said, that's it, from now on, you're going to be required to print the screen and provide evidence that they're not on the debarred and suspended list. And now the federal government actually gives you some information on how to do that. And so I'll show you that here in just a minute. The easiest way to, at this point that I'm aware of, to look up to see if any of these people are on the debarred and suspended list is to go to this website, the fsd.gov, and there's a search bar right in the middle of the page, because it'll say that you need to sign in. And when you don't have to sign in to search for these how-to guides. When you register your UEI, the unique identifier, yep, you are going to have to register. So you will be able to log in because you will be registering if you do not already have your UEI. And through your registration process, then you'll be able to review everything. But just to see how all of their questions, their frequently asked questions are really good, you don't have to sign in to do that. You can just go to that website, look in the middle of the page, there's a big search bar, and click it. And then the other thing to mention is records retention. And I didn't put the exact time frame that you're going to have to retain these records because I don't know. It looks like the ARPA guidelines that I saw showed that you're going to have to retain records at least 5 years after the final reporting date for the county. And we don't know when our final reporting date is going to be. We know it's at least December 2024. We presume that there are going to be projects continue to be approved through 2024, and that if it takes 2 or 3 years to do some of these projects, it could be 2027 plus 5 years. So at least it's going to be through 2029 at this point. And then for fixed asset records, usually the retention record period is the life of that asset. So if your life of your asset is 50 years or 75 years, you are going to have a record of this for a long time. And I presume that you already do have records of your assets, but I just want to reiterate that that's important, especially early on during the audit time period. Before I get to that section where we're identifying your contact information, the contact information for the county, let me pull up here, we got the mouse going. It's going really slow. All right. A little bit of information. This is a quick start guide on searching for exclusions. So I believe that Tara printed this for you. It's in the back of the room. If it helps to have it before you leave. This is going to that website that the FS, whatever it was there, the fsd.gov. Then you can click on some links there. You end up at sam.gov ultimately, and you search for that. But this helpful guide really is pretty easy to look at and search through and help walk you through it. There's several questions on here that you may find applicable. You know, what is an exclusion record? What are the classifications? Do I have to have the UEI to look? What if they don't have one? And some information like that. So I just wanted you to know that those are here. I wanted you to see that this is the type of thing that you will find under those frequently asked questions portion. If you just type in how to, these guides will pop up. And another one is how to print verification whether an entity is excluded. And again, this is in the back of the room. This is something that we have in our files, that if you need to print the verification, which you do, in this case, that they have no active exclusions, then you can follow this process. It's a lot easier to see when you're actually have it up on your computer screen to follow. And it does then, this is new information. It says to print or download the verification, use your browser's print function or type Control P. So it actually, they must have had so many determined audit findings out the get-go of them enforcing this provision that they actually resulted in doing this, which is great. And then I wanted to populate the screen here real quick with the payment request format that we're going to be asking you to use. Let me move it over to the first tab. So many of you worked with the county attorney, Tyler Palmer, before he left. And Tyler worked with, particularly Tara and I, to establish this attachment A, and I think now Ryan's been working with your agencies in attaching this to your funding agreement. But with each payment submission, then we would like for you to include this cover sheet. And it's got different sections, project summary and plan, and you're basically attesting that you're including or you've already submitted in a prior request, like a copy of the project plan. That the plan includes a description of the service that your agency is providing, that the plan includes how the funds are going to be spent in terms of design, construction, the description of the improvement and things like that. It includes a section on the solicitation of contract records, and really a whole lot of effort that you're going to have on this initially with the county's involvement is going to be upfront on procuring these items. So there is this section, just making sure that you're reading through it and checking, hey, we already did it, we've already sent you this, or we're including this information with this new request that we're sending in. And I can see a typo right there on number 4, that project requirements does not have a capital at the front of that, like the rest of those sentences, but that's okay. Oh, neither does price. We get down into the project records. And again, this is just, you're going to be signing off or initialing or checking that you've gone through some of the items that have been discussed, that you've already submitted a copy of a conflict of interest, that you're attaching your proof of expenses, so on and so forth, and then that you're going to maintain the audit records and comply with the audit requirements. The language, the certification language, is actually required by the federal government for anything that's submitted. It's certifying that you're attesting to the best of your ability that the information is accurate. And moving on to the summary sheet, you would be submitting your payment request. We'd like for you to number those and keep track of them, number 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. The period that's covered, some of this information is very self-explanatory. In the nuts and bolts section of this, again, we're asking right on the face of this, please attach, I don't know if you can see that. Is it too small to read? I could increase the size, I believe. You're attaching your documentation for the county to review before submitting the payment. And we've got preloaded descriptions, assuming that many of these projects include, whoa, slow down. Design, construction materials, project management, permits and fees. I don't know if your projects are going to include all of these tabs. You can work with Don and Joanne, and they with us, or us with you, however it's going to work. We can certainly modify these individual components. This serves as like a template, exactly what it's called. It's a template. If your specifications are different and you need these components instead of design, that it says something else, I don't know, pipe. I'm not really sure exactly what you're going to be needing, but we can certainly change those, or you can change those. The headers of those at this point are just typed in. So you can change them. You would just need to be consistent that they run across each of your payment requests once those are changed. And again, you can work with us to do that. The bottom, that top portion will summarize tabs that these are, let me highlight this for you. These are Mojave County funded items sourced to ARPA. You may well be providing additional resources, and that you're funding those with other resources from your own water revenue or your interest income that you earn on your balances, or I'm not really sure what types of other revenues you would have. But if you have other revenues, then the total would make up the entire project. So you might have project cost with portions of them charged to ARPA, and you might have other, let's say, unallowable costs from the federal government, but they are allowed as part of the project. Those are going to go under your own section. At the bottom of the screen, on the spreadsheet, and maybe I should add or ask, for those of you that are going to be working directly with Don and Joanne, are you familiar with Excel? Are your people comfortable? Okay. So the tabs along the bottom show, then just scoot over to those tabs. So for design, for example, it's the same information as what you have on the front page, at the top of the page. Then you're going to be entering your budget for what you have for design. And then you're going to list each, in that section on line 17, on row 17, you would then, it's got the information, list each contractor, subcontractor, vendor, any of that separately within each of these unique tabs. And we've got tabs for design, construction materials. If those elements are not applicable to the project you're doing, you can change those to be applicable. Change the name of the tab, it will align with your front page. You're going to basically, I think this looks a little complicated. It is not, once you get into it. You're just listing your invoices. You're putting the contractor name, the invoice number, the date, and then you're with the current request. So on this one, on line or row 19, you're going to enter this request. It's the first one. I haven't spent anything at this point in time. I'm gonna enter, $10,000. It's going to then populate the spreadsheet. I believe that when you go to the front page, it's going to populate my summary page and show that I'm submitting a request. What isn't in here right now is the budget, but I could go and do that quickly, I believe, and I think that it would. I'll put in 20,000. That will then show that I'm asking for 10,000 against that. 50% will have been spent. It leaves a balance of 10,000. This bottom portion, I'm sorry, the screen is jumping around. It's a sensitive mouse. And then that will roll into the front page. So now you've got the budget in there. The change orders would populate if you have a change order from the other page. If you have an amended budget, then a change order will cause you to have a revised budget. And if you had previously requested invoices, those are going to show up in the previously dispersed amounts, your totals to date, anything. Anyway, I believe that we've got the calculations covered, so you don't have to do a lot of that work. And I hope this will really work well for us in gathering all that information and keeping track of your total project costs and your total to date, so that you are always aware of your unobligated balance. And with that, that really covers the information that I needed to discuss with you, and I'm certainly welcome any questions as well.
Are we limited in the amount of draws that we can pull a month? Or is it just going to be like one due date per month for billing and invoicing?
So I had not thought of that. So I'm going to say the best answer, like all answers, it depends. So it depends on your schedule. It depends, in your case, you're going to be working with Joanne, I think. So if Joanne says, hey, I'm going to be out of the office for a week, and during that time period, I would normally have this backup person to review this. That person had this emergency event. They're not going to be able to. Can you send it every 2 weeks instead of every week? We do have we do pay bills once a week right now. So they also have other work besides these projects. And they're also very busy besides these projects. So I guess that's it depends on their schedule, we are capable of paying that weekly. And if you're in a situation, or if they get in a situation, it certainly happened to me where, you know, occasionally I'm actually early, very rarely. So if it ended up, came across somebody's desk, or it's on my desk, which is usually the case, that it gets stuck into my queue because you've got, you know, in their case, they've got, Dawn's going to be working with 5 projects at one time simultaneously, and she's got these due dates, and she knows that she has to respond back to you, let's say in 15 days or 20 days to get you the payment. So it may very well be that you were gone or out of the office, and you called on and say, I'm sorry, I was gone. I didn't know I was going to be gone, or I did know I was going to be gone. But this is due to the contractor in 4 days. Can you rush this? And she says, yes, I can. She contacts finance, and we say, yes, we can. And we will do a manual, the EFT, the electronic funds transfer, is the easiest and quickest. We can get that to you then the next day. Oh, okay. Yeah, and you guys can establish that, I think, internally as to your schedules. We have internal dates set for when they have to be into finance too. We do have dates, but again, based upon what we have to do to make sure that there aren't penalties incurred. I mean, if there are serious issues, like it's constant, then obviously we would talk about how we can better manage the flow. But to have events that require special consideration, then we'll do that. So I presume that they're going to say, well, I have these weekly due dates, and especially once they get going and know what they are, that they'll probably want to establish due dates so they have sufficient time to review, and the project manager has sufficient time to review, and us to get that back to you. But right now, I'm really assuming that our turnaround time is going to be, and I think it's actually in the funding agreement, maybe 20 days, something like that. I think I saw that somewhere. So hopefully that works, because we know that you're on a timeline. Thanks for the question.
Yes, because I'm a president and engineer involved in big projects, he had a lot of contacts, and he was thinking about having someone else manage the project for us, and some other smaller companies wanted to join with us and have it manage the project, but we don't have to do all this, but they do it for us. Is that acceptable?
Yes. So just for the recording, the question is, if your districts or your entities want to pool together, or even independently, hire a project manager independent so that your own staff are not tasked with this, yes, you can hire an outside person to do your project management side of it, or multiple people. It may, I don't know how involved it'll be. If you had somebody doing the construction pieces and somebody doing the paperwork pieces, you certainly may do that. Yep. The what? I'm sorry. So, okay. So the question is, can that come under the ARPA funding? And I would say yes. I mean, if you can hire a construction manager or a project manager, an engineer, you should be able to hire an administrator, an accountant, the people with expertise, so that it happens, it occurs, and you're helped to the best of your ability to do the best that you can to get the project completed. So the same with the county, we can use administrative funds to also aid with that. That's a good question. Yes, you can.
Contract for it, make sure that you follow all of the procurement requirements.
Great comment. And again, for the record, Tara reminded us that if you contract out for any of the other professional services, then you will need to make sure when you procure that you do follow the CFR in procuring those services as well.
So we can't just pick a manager, we would have to put it up to
That would depend on your thresholds. So if you were going to spend less than $10,000, you could enter into a contract under a fair and reasonable price with an individual. If you're going to spend between $10,000 and $250,000, I think those are the right thresholds. I always have to go back and look at the thresholds. But if it's going to be considered the simplified acquisition, then you would need to get multiple proposals and evaluate those proposals. If you think you're going to spend $250,000 on a consultant, I would say, maybe you should rethink your plan, but you would need to go through a formal process. Are you done?
We'll just both be here.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think, well, I want to put up, we have the contact information on here as well, so let's get that advanced. Just so that you guys have this contact information. So we do have the sign-in sheet at the back, and both Joanne and Don will make sure that they provide their email address and phone number on that. I will email it out to anyone that is on the list when I get it back to the office. But here is their contact information. Again, Chloride, your contact is Joanne. Everybody else, your contact person is Don. And now we're officially ready for any additional questions that you might have, questions that you might have of any other staff as well. But it's not just the Coral and Tara show. We just have the bulk of the information right now, so. Sure. So that contact information is already on your sheets. I printed this entire PowerPoint presentation for you, but go ahead and jot it down if it's easier to see that way. Yeah, as I say, that might be a little hard to see in the 3-point font. So, and I can email this PowerPoint presentation. I can PDF it as a slide per page. I just didn't want to waste county resources on 30 pages for each person printed out, but I can email it to you and you guys can have it electronically. Any other comments from any county staff? So what I will say is, can I get a representative from each project owner that's here to pick up a packet for me for the vendor registration, just so that we know we can get that vendor registration updated. And then I can be at the back table as well if you still need to sign in or pick up any of the handouts that we have. All right. Thank you guys for being here. I'm gonna take my laptop down.
I will take one of them.
Okay. That should be right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you guys are
Chloride, yes.
Nice to officially meet you.
Yes, it's always nice to put a face with all the names.
Yes, a lot of information.